Don't worry guys, it passed.
Heads.
Or tails.
Come on, let me through. Heads.
Or tails.
Heads. Told you. I never find that as satisfying as I'd imagined.
Chin up, there's always next time.
I suppose there is.
So, here we are, staring down what is supposedly one of the greatest games ever made. And you know what? It almost justifies that label. Almost. My mark of a great game is one that you feel like you'd enjoy playing through it again. The first Bioshock doesn't scratch that particular itch for me. I simply could not stand its combat for very long, and the game had a nasty habit of slowing down to the point of boredom. The defining point of that game for me was walking down a corridor of ice and thinking, how much longer is this friggin' game? Bioshock Infinite doesn't have that problem. It's not flawless, of course, but it captivates in a mysterious way. Shot through with enough flaws to compete with the amount of leaks in Rapture, this is one of those games that simply overwhelms the senses to cancel any criticism out while playing it. Getting bored exploring for voxophones? Here's some awesome character moments. Sick and tired of shooting at enemies? Ride a sky rail or throw some crows at them. Environment design feel a bit lacking at points? Feast your ears on some of the greatest usages of music and sound in any video game ever.
Anything like that before, have you?
Beaches I know don't smell much like that.
It's startling how I can notice these cracks in the veneer and still not care just a couple of seconds later. This game just throws so much at you, wrapped up in an impressive production package, that it's almost worthless to even try and tear this game apart. But I will do my damned hardest.
Okay, I'm sure I can get this thing going.
The Lord forgives everything, but I'm just a prophet, so I don't have to. Amen.
You play as Booker DeWitt, a former Pinkerton agent with a mysterious past, who is tasked with rescuing a girl named Elizabeth and using her to wipe away his gambling debts. Elizabeth is being held in the floating city of Columbia, an island of 20th century American exceptionalism and a wonder of technology. That's the launch pad for the narrative. A simple boy rescuing girl narrative quickly becomes much, much more than that. It soon becomes apparent that the paradise is not as heavenly as it would seem, and the cracks in the armor soon begin to feature. Racism, religious extremism, and egomania all collide to reveal Columbia as the fragile city it is. Once you fight your way through a small army to reach Elizabeth, it is revealed that the cracks in Columbia's facade are a metaphor for the cracks in the facade of reality itself, as she has the power to open up tears in time and space to reach other realities and affect them in numerous ways. This opens up a myriad of possibilities in the narrative as Booker helps her escape from her prison. After that, the game becomes a whirlwind of social revolution, time travel theorems, and the meaning of fate. Heavy stuff. What's simultaneously awesome and frustrating about the story is how much it relies on the details in the environment and on dialogue and voxophones to flesh it all out. The voxophones in particular are the most important pieces here, handing out startling revelations about characters and their motivations, and their relations to each other.
Tonight, the prophet moved against his political enemies. He preaches mercy, but 40 souls lie tonight dead in unmarked graves. If a man was ever unworthy of grace, who would be my husband?
The problem with handling a narrative in this way is that both the pacing and the state of things can suffer. If you miss any voxophones, then you will miss a lot of the story, but the search for those voxophones can cause some weirdly inert moments.
There's gotta be another way in.
They called Slade a monster and a traitor. I know the men who died in the Hall of Heroes with Captain Slate. There is no shame to be counted in their number.
Not to mention the huge killer pacing that the searches themselves can be, and you were guaranteed to miss quite a few voxophones on your first playthrough. I spent roughly 60% of my playtime simply searching every possible nook and cranny, and I still came up short by about 9 voxophones, which confounded me. How the heck did I miss those? Did I not already grind the narrative to a halt enough searching for them? you have to actively go out of your way to not enjoy the narrative at the pace the developers wanted you to in order to acquire the details that are absolutely essential in understanding the story itself in any capacity.
The truth is, I don't have a lot of time for all that prophecy nonsense. I tell you, belief is just a commodity.
Other elements are handled in much the same way, like the various movie machines scattered around, or some brief scripted moments and world-building interactions.
Someone gave it to me, I promise. I ain't never smoked one before.
Hey, smoke 'em if you got 'em, pal.
But they present much the same problem. Spec Ops: The Line didn't have this problem. It presented enough information in its main narrative so that anybody could easily get a handle on the situation. The packets of intel and radio messages left scattered around were entirely optional and helped enrich the story without holding important details hostage to exploration.
One man goes into the waters of baptism, a different man comes out, born again. But who is that man who lies submerged? Perhaps that swimmer is both sinner and saint.
But the awesome environment details, scripted NPC interactions, and excellent usage of music to judge tone help to mitigate the aforementioned flaws. It's one thing to spend half an hour searching through a dank and dark room for some plot. It's quite another doing it while besieged on all sides by awe-inspiring vistas and locating a trigger for some exceptional character building. And that is what this game essentially boils down to: characters and their relationships to each other. In this game, nothing is certain, except for the relationship between Elizabeth and Booker. The ways in which their fates intertwine and affect each other offers up some of the most compelling interactions in gaming history. Without wishing to spoil too much, let it be said that Elizabeth is the greatest achievement of Infinite, and possibly of this video game generation. Her personality, her fears, her motivations is what keeps both Booker and the player going. Whatever happened throughout the narrative, I was glad that she was beside me, despite how much her personality can vary wildly depending on the situation.
Elizabeth, little help?
I'll give it a whirl.
What is it about that song that brings in the bird?
It always has. When I was younger, I used to be excited when I heard it.
Despite some dodgy animations on her part, she is a companion for the ages. Booker himself is a marked departure from the silent protagonist archetype. He has conversations, observations, and actions to perform that define him, and whatever the player chooses to do cannot alter him.
Excuse me, where am I?
Heaven. Or as close as we'll see till Judgment Day.
Best keep such questions to myself, unless I want to get made.
The decision to make him talk was crucial. It keeps the player at enough of a distance from the experience to appreciate the grand arcs of the narrative, while simultaneously giving Elizabeth and the other characters someone to play off of in a meaningful way. When critics talk about how great the character of Elizabeth is, they also imply the interactions between her and Booker, for that is the focal point of the game. These two exceptional characters.
Look at these, they're amazing. Which one do you like more, this one or this? The bird is beautiful and the cage is somber, but there's really something special about it. I just can't decide.
That said, there are a few characters who lack dimension. The songbird, for all of the build-up, all of the interactions you have with it, is sadly underused. The potential was there for a deep psychological connection between Elizabeth and the bird, but it isn't developed enough so that, by the conclusion, we feel anything substantial. Comstock and Daisy Fitzroy, the leaders of Columbia and the resistance group Vox Populi respectively, are present only through reputation for most of the game, Comstock even more so. As a result, their characters and motivations are kind of thin. Comstock doesn't have the same impact as Andrew Ryan, for example. Daisy Fitzroy, in particular, just comes across as pointless, as an excuse to have enemies wearing different colored shirts after a certain point, and by extension reveals the Vox as just a plot point and nothing more. This also ties into the moralist themes of the game, which holds that no side is morally pure, which is okay in real life, but it holds that the racist leaders of Columbia are on the same level as the Vox Populi, who are fighting to overthrow the racist regime. That's a dodge, and the game should be called out for that.
When it comes down to it, the only difference between Comstock and Fitzroy is how you spell the name.
But there are awesome characters, like the Lutece twins, who are as mysterious in appearance as they are in motivation. Appearing throughout the story, they function as a reality check of sorts, and as providers of levity, as absurd as it is thoughtful.
If we could perceive time as it truly was.
What reason would grammar professors have to get out of bed?
A character called Cornelius Slate, who fought with Booker and Comstock at Wounded Knee, also provides a great piece of interactive story in your encounter with him. All of this builds up to the ending, which is one of the most enigmatic closings to a game that I've ever witnessed. Without spoiling anything, relationships between realities, Booker and Elizabeth get altered and twisted in surprising ways. You do need to invest a considerable amount of time searching for voxophones to get the full context for it, but once the context is there, then the ending is about as beautiful as you could possibly make it. That's not to say that the damn good core of the game excuses some of the excesses of the main plot, which has a lot of troubling issues and historical misappropriations. It has been pointed out to me that the religious aspects of this game are not used in any proper terms, and some people will have a major problem with this game because of it. The game focuses heavily on rather vague applications of religious rites, symbolism, and philosophies. While Ken Levine can utilize artistic license and simply wave such criticisms away, anyone who is deeply immersed in their particular religious beliefs is likely to find a lot of questionable moments here and there.
And so our prophet led the people away from the Sodom below, up into the city, where they created an even more perfect union.
The historical focus on the era of American exceptionalism can also present some weird moments. It has also been pointed out to me just how weirdly the game handles historical flashpoints like the Boxer Rebellion, and more dicey stuff like the concept of the white man's burden, which was more of a British colonial subject. Monuments to great American leaders, by Columbia's definition, abound, and some of them can be downright tasteless and unjustified. The Lutece twins, despite their awesomeness, throw a whole heap of Deus Ex Machina moments into the plot, which is kind of appropriate considering the fact that you have a symbolic daughter of God playing alongside you the whole time. The quantum mechanics that get tossed into the storyline are the crutch on which the game's logic exists, and the whole affair can get dizzying if you aren't paying attention. Trust me, you do have to pay attention to a lot of the smaller details, or else you could become lost, which is why the voxophones become as important as they are. To put it lightly, Ken Levine is trying his damned hardest to create a thought-provoking moving experience. If and how he succeeds is likely to provide endless discussion fodder for ages. We may never know the complete picture, because this game has a lot of details, both meaningful and meaningless, or underdeveloped, that muddy everything up. But the ending is what will stick in your mind. It's up to you on how to interpret it in the context of the narrative that Ken Levine has designed.
Hallelujah.
You already know that this is one of the most beautifully designed games ever made. I mean, look at it. Seriously, the color palettes alone make this game look serene. Indeed, like heaven. As mentioned, the details in the environments are what helps tell the story. But, is there something rotten in the state of Colombia? Let's get to brass tacks. Colombia is an imaginative setting. It certainly looks like heaven, but dig a little deeper and things can get a bit dicey. For starters, there are a lot of ugly textures in this game, to the point where my immersion into the story was broken. What's odd is that certain instances of ugliness occur in places where you wouldn't expect them to. There's a fight that takes place around a statue, and that statue is just one big, fugly texture. It's not that the statue itself is not designed badly, but the low quality of the statue's texture contrasts badly with everything around it. These small errors are nothing compared to some of the more fragile artistic design choices scattered throughout the game. For instance, one of the first things you'll notice, and the aspect of the game that will be thrown into your face the most, are the NPCs. Sure, the first crowd or two you run into will be awesome to behold, as you overhear conversations, enjoy animations, and soak in the atmosphere of the Society of Columbia, the first cracks appear. None of the NPCs in the game, besides Elizabeth and your enemies, seem remotely alive after they said their one scripted line or progress through their one animation loop. It's only the NPCs who mine stores where you have the option to steal certain items that have any life to them.
Alright, no need to get emotional.
This is most evident in the fairgrounds, where the various vendors and entertainers will endlessly repeat their lines and animations, regardless of how many times you've already heard them.
Young sir, young miss, roll up and try the amazing power of bucking bronco. Find the devil, good sir, and cast him out. Do you have what it takes?
The infamous Handyman exhibition, in particular, comes across as a cheap attempt to strain some emotion from lifeless animation loops. After that, the game can't quite elevate its NPC interactions beyond the scripted level, which makes the game world seem, oddly enough, more devoid of life than Rapture did.
In the open part of the stage.
What's even sillier is the way that NPCs will suddenly disappear if a gunfight erupts. Now, I'm not saying that civilians evacuating during a gunfight wouldn't be sensible in the game. What I am pointing out is that the civilians either transport instantly or are birthed from the Flash Comics universe. It's almost comical how quickly fully crowded areas empty whenever a single shot erupts. It breaks immersion in this lovely game world when stuff like that happens, and I'm sad that it's there. However, despite how much those flaws can break the immersion, they pale in comparison to just how good the rest of the art design is. There are sights in this game that can overwhelm your vision with beauty, and this is why the game still packs a potent punch with its art design. There are so many imaginative set-piece moments, so many gorgeous environments, that it almost succeeds in leaving Rapture far, far behind in terms of level and environment design. If you let it, this game can absorb you like no other with its beauty.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by?
Mother of God, is the music in this game good. In fact, this is probably the single greatest usage of music in a game ever. The music in this game is more than just a companion to the experience, it is the experience. From its usage as a metaphor for the caging of Elizabeth to the simple, emotional resonance of the chaos of battle.
I see a lockpick over there.
This is a case study for excellence in every possible way. The battle themes deserve specific praise for their dynamic forms. Every time you dispatch an enemy or headshot a foe, a slash of music, in key with the already playing theme, will chime in. The fact that the music itself, with the usage of a small orchestra of live players, is thrilling is another great part about it. Since the battle themes encompass around 50% of the music you will be hearing, it was imperative that they not be lackluster, and Gary Shyman certainly proves his skill in these instances. What you will walk away from this game with the best impression of is the world-building music. From the start, you are confronted with this masterpiece. You then progress to cleverly arranged covers of notable songs.
So what good would living do me? God only knows what I'd be without you.
And then transition to breathlessly atmospheric scores. In any other universe, Bioshock Infinite would already have won every single possible award for its musical design and composition, and it deserves to win in this aspect. The sound design is uniformly excellent across the board. The ambiences are immersive as all hell, with very few moments of complete silence. The guns and vigor effects are powerful, providing some dense combat soundscapes as bullets and explosives whirl through the air. The sound design has used the skyline provides a thrill heretofore unseen in games before, and you'll definitely want to take every advantage of combat strategies and weapons just so you can hear the delightful sound design. Tomb Raider may have more of an edge in this department, but Bioshock Infinite has soundscapes that rival its peers. That said, there are a few hiccups here and there. As you explore the environment, you'll come across voxophones, cinema machines, and arcade cabinets. The problem with these is the crackling, meant to simulate the poor quality of early sound recordings. Now, the crackling probably does recreate the sound of recording back in the day, but you'll soon notice that every single thing that emits sound in Columbia was recorded on the exact same machine at the exact same time. Every single machine plays this same crackle loop. I don't know why that infuriated me, but it definitely became grating after the millionth voxophone odyssey. I know that sound design doesn't have much in terms of space and developmental resources in a game's design, but when a sound is that grating and meant to be taken as low quality, then you have to put a bit more effort into making it less apparent or not as annoying. Other than that though, this is award quality work, and the game is so much more of a delight with it. A lot of reviews have noted that the gameplay, in regards to the shooting mechanics, is lackluster. I beg to differ. The main problem I had with Bioshock 1 was endemic to its shooting mechanics, in that they just felt off. That feeling of unease didn't help the game, it hindered it, and that's why I dread another playthrough of it. It certainly had a ton of variety, a lot of systems to interact with, and you could carry a bunch of weapons with you. Bioshock Infinite has smoother controls, and that's why it's a better shooter. The central tenet of first-person shooters has been the need for smooth controls. It's the most important element of how the game feels. Otherwise, if a game has crappy or less than ideal controls, then any other element you throw into the game has to be viewed through a flawed prism of how the player interacts with the world. Bioshock Infinite, to repeat myself, has smooth controls, and thus the experience is better by a mile. Instead of fighting the game's controls, you are fighting the enemies, and thus you can afford to be a bit more strategic in your movements, opening up the skylines for a fast-paced, chaotic experience. To elaborate, I didn't mind the lack of variety in the amount of weaponry you could carry. This decision to limit the weapon choices makes a lot of situations more tense, as you may not have the best weapons for the situation. As a result, every battle forces you to think on your feet and be accurate. Bioshock 1 had a distinct lack of serious tension, because you could pull out a rocket launcher and waste anything quite easily. Here, you have to make every shot count and move around to avoid being overwhelmed. It creates a nice dynamic to the game. This vindicates the decision to have every ammunition type be the same price at the various vendors scattered about. The game is allowing you to choose your preferred weapons and stick with them, without forcing you to turn to a rocket launcher every single time things get dicey. But of course, if the game was entirely about shooting, then it would be boring, which is where the vigors come in. The Vigors take the place of the Plasmids, and you can equip them in much the same way. The various abilities on display here are impressive in the way that they subtly alter battle flows and strategies. From a Vigor that sends a horde of murderous crows towards distant foes, to a Vigor that allows possession of machines, to a basic fire ability, this game packs a lot of depth into your abilities, and the various upgrades you can purchase for your preferred Vigors certainly adds even more. Sure, the Plasmids had a narrative purpose, and the Vigors have comparatively little. Save for a comment on how to make the Master Race even more powerful, but they are such a delight to use that it hardly matters why they exist so much as how you use them. Elizabeth adds yet another dimension. Though much more of a chaotic flair than anything else, she will use her trans-dimensional abilities to locate ammo, salts, and money for you to use in battle. It's not something you should stake your life on, but it can often come at the best possible times, allowing the flow of the battles to continue unabated.
Booker, here.
Much obliged.
Music. It's coming from that tear.
I never heard that song before.
I don't suspect anyone's heard that song.
Alright, some of the enemies, especially the handyman, can get obnoxiously bullet spongy, but it didn't matter so much, possibly because I was playing on medium like a pansy, but I didn't feel like dying a whole lot on my first playthrough, and indeed, I didn't die once, and I got a better feel for the AI and story as a result. Mind you, I can see how such sponges would become a problem in the harder difficulties, so be warned. What does keep the combat going is the use of Elizabeth's strategic tears in the skylines, which gives each combat encounter involved a breathless momentum that is matched only by some spectacle fighters. Elizabeth's tears can provide many things, from hooks to gain higher ground, to life-saving medkits, from turrets to cover. This provides another layer of tactical, if not strategic depth, to which the first Bioshock can merely look at and whimper. The skylines, aside from providing a momentum which would make Sonic weep, transform the game into a cinematic experience. The question has been asked, what purpose does the combat serve? Good question. The answer, I think, lies in the ending. Again, without spoiling too much, the ending brings up a lot of questions about the meanings of fate and the effect of and the response to violence from the protagonist and antagonist. Booker has some serious mental scars as a result of events at Wounded Knee, and his response to that violent event shaped his personality. Violence leads to violence, which begets violence. I think the combat serves its purpose in the narrative. Though some events are hard to reconcile, I do understand how a lot of people think the combat serves little purpose, and I may be clutching at straws here, but I think the narrative justifies it, if only a little. However, and I have mentioned before how one aspect can ruin a bit of the game, the need to explore the environment presents an interesting conundrum. The game's pacing can suffer immensely in search of not just voxophones, but ammo, salts, extra vigors, and various infusions to buff your health, shields, and vigor capacity. But in order to make progression tolerable, especially on the harder difficulties, you are required to explore. This push and pull of narrative pacing and gaming progression is what makes Bioshock Infinite such an interesting case study of the simultaneous success and failure of such a fundamental mechanic. On one hand, it's necessary, on the other, it's completely mauling the experience. What does push Infinite into the positive more than the negative is the art design, sound design, and general feel of the controls. It's hard to stay mad at a game where you can jump off the sky rail and send someone hurtling towards their doom below. In the end, the story of Bioshock Infinite is what makes it a great game, but also what makes it frustratingly vague. The ending itself will be discussed for years, much like the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's that thought-provoking. But before you get to the ending, you get to experience one of the great journeys in video game narratives, filled to the brim with great character interactions, exciting set pieces, and an attention to environment detail that provokes awe. In those terms, this is one of the great games. Maybe not the greatest, but in terms of story, this could be a game that frustrates more than it enthralls. This is a watershed moment, not for any sort of perfections, but for its imperfections. No other game that I can think of represents the dilemmas of game design and narrative design so perfectly. This is, in short, one of the big ones. A game that will be played, a game that will be experienced, and a game that will be talked about infinitely.
Songs of heaven, which you say with childish voice. Do you love the hymns they taught you, or are songs of earth your choice?